Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Jakarta Tech Talk. Joining us today, we have Michael Redlick discussing getting started with Jakarta NoSQL and MongoDB. Michael is a senior research technician at ExxonMobil Research and Engineering. He has enjoyed numerous assignments with the company, including automotive testing, analytical sciences practicing, infrared spectroscopy, and chemomechanics, and developing scientific IT applications. If you have any questions for Mike as we move through today's presentation, you can feel free to ask it in the Ask a Questions tab at the bottom or in the chat. Without any further delay, Mike, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Haley, for the introduction. Thank you for reading, my background at ExxonMobil. It's been almost 32 years with the company. So, and I'm looking forward to retiring within the next 2 to 3 years. So. So welcome today. Thanks for coming out. I must let you know that if I look sweaty, I am. It's because our site experienced a significant flood in our central plant, and as a result, our AC has been down. So, but anyway, it's very warm on here. So this is me. My background is from computer science at Rutgers, and even though I practice polymer physics, I've had some assignment in the company in IT over these past 32 years. But in my off hours, I do a lot of contributions into the Java community. I'm the lead Java Q editor for InfoQ. I've been running the Garden State Java user group for the past 20 and a half years, although for almost the last year, it's under this name now, but it was under the ACG&J Java group before that, and we went nonprofit about a year ago. I'm also on the leadership council of the Jakarta EE ambassadors, so I spend a lot of my free time in the Java space. So the objectives for this morning is, what is Jakarta NoSQL? You may have heard references to Eclipse JNoSQL. We want to cover some NoSQL database types, discuss the NoSQL layers, and the best part, of course, which is everybody looks forward to, is a demo, and we'll see if something can break because things always go on when you do these things live. And then discuss some Jakarta NoSQL resources and how to get involved as well. Okay, so Jakarta NoSQL. Okay, this is one of the specifications under the Jakarta EE. It is at the moment not under the profiles, like the web profile or the core profile. Otavio Santana is the spec lead. And this specification looks to streamline all, the integration of Java applications with NoSQL databases. And there are many of them out there. And when I first started studying this, I was amazed at how many NoSQL databases are out there. This specification defines a set of APIs and a standard implementation of most of these NoSQL databases. It's often referred to as one API, many databases. This is designed to be more simple. And the Garden State Java user group has adopted this specification. I have made a handful of contributions so far, and I look forward to doing many more. And just so you know, all the specifications, any Java group, if you happen to belong to one or lead one, and if you're interested in adopting any of the specs, you can go ahead and do so. I forget what the URL is, but you can try to look that up and you can follow the process how to do that. So Eclipse JNoSQL is the compatible implementation of this spec. And there is, for all database types, there is one defined API. And we'll talk about those database types in a minute. And there's a consistent use of annotations to map Java objects, and you'll see some references to annotations from the relational database world. So I'm going to do some comparisons to that as well. So the NoSQL database types is there's key value, column family, document, and graph. And MongoDB falls under the document NoSQL database type. So the key value, the cartoon there, I apologize for that. There is a line going from Apollo to Sun and so on. So the key value is the simplest of all the NoSQL databases. The client is allowed to get a value for a specific key, assign a value, and delete the key. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Value itself can be any type. It could be, the binary large object or blob or anything. And it's the responsibility of the application to know what is being stored. And because this is very simple, the performance, of course, is quite scalable and quite easy to be scaled. Use cases: storing session data, maintaining schema-less user profiles, and storing user preferences. And examples of this database type will include Redis, which I'm sure a lot of you have used, MemcacheDB, and RIAC, R-I-A-K, which I've never actually heard of until before this. Comparing a key value NoSQL type to a relational database, as you can see on this table here. So a table would be referred to as a bucket, and a row would be considered a key value pair in that NoSQL world. Column family. Data is stored in cells grouped in columns of data rather than in rows. So basically the other way around. And columns are grouped into column families, as you can see by the diagram here. And column families are groups of similar data that are usually accessed together. The main advantage over a relational database would be faster search and access and actually data aggregation. And use cases for this will include content management systems, blogging platforms, and applications that require heavy write requests, such as log aggregators, for example. You may want to avoid using NoSQL type if there are a lot of complex queries. So, an example databases include Cassandra and Apache Hadoop. And similarly, here's the differences between the two here versus relational versus column family, and there's no relationship like on the other ones as well. So, okay. Document database is similar to key value, but the value itself is structured, and you're all familiar with JSON. And technically, MongoDB itself uses binary JSON. So I guess it serializes that. And so it's very easy to use in that regard. But if you've ever worked with MongoDB and try to do some kind of querying, it could be pretty intense. It could be a lot of the curly braces and whatnot to try to get everything right the first time. Can be very challenging. So again, too, you may want to avoid the document type if there are complex, querying. And use cases would be e-commerce applications and content management systems as well. And here you can see the differences between the two. So it's a collection that's referred to instead of a table, and a document itself, which is the JSON, document, and then a column is a key value pair. And last but not least is the graph database type. You can see some relationships going there. He says Apollo, or Hephaestus loves Apollo, and then there's a connection between Apollo and Ares that are brothers, and so on. Apologize for the graphics not being as clear as it should. But think of graph theory, right? So you see in there is vertex and edge. If you remember your computer science on that, in graph theory, we refer to a lot of these things as vertices and edges. So you can see that there. A graph, by the way, is built on top of what's known as the entity attribute value model. You can encode in a space-efficient manner entities where the number of attributes that can be used to describe them is potentially vast, but the number that will actually apply to a given entity is relatively modest. It's a flexible way to describe how data relates to other data. And use cases would use as fraud detection, graph-based search, and social networks. And example databases in this family are Neo4j, MongoDB, and OrientDB. Okay, any questions at the moment, Haley? Okay. Next, we have the two different layers. And the first one is communication. And this was formerly known as Diana when the spec was first developed. So if you see some old blog posts from a couple of years ago, you'll see references to this. And the mapping layer was referred to as Artemis. And here you can see a diagram where everything is related together. You can see all the all the NoSQL database families at the bottom and how they connect all together. So the communication layer is a set of APIs that obviously defines communications with all the NoSQL databases. There are modules representing all four types. So you see when you use one of them, there's all the classes will begin with the name of the NoSQL type. And you can think of this synonymously in the relational database world, like the JDBC APIs. The mapping layer, obviously similar to like Hibernate and whatnot. You can map your Java objects to those databases, and this specification incorporates the context and dependency injection and Jakarta bean validation specs. It is annotation driven, and if you've worked with JPA in the past, you can obviously compare. You'll see annotations that are similar to those JPA annotations as well. So we will see that. That'll be clear in the example that I have here. So going back to what I said before about each of those NoSQL types, if you can't see it, the x-axis is complexity and y-axis is scalability. So you can see where each of those fall. The key value, obviously, less complex and more highly scalable, and so on. So as I mentioned earlier, it's amazing how many NoSQL databases are out there. I don't know if any of you have heard of any of these. And I'm sure there's a lot more than that as well. These are ones that are supported by the Jakarta NoSQL specification. So you obviously see the ones, we got the Hazelcast, CouchDB. Apache Tinkerpop is a graph NoSQL type, and I believe there's no specific classes for the graph NoSQL database type because the specification leverages Apache Tinkerpop. All right, if there's no questions, we'll go to the demo. Okay. So I am a craft beer enthusiast, and those of you who know me well, I try to visit craft breweries when I visit different cities, and that kind of thing. So of course, why not have an application that deals with beer? And I have a MongoDB, obviously, a database It's known as beer DB. And here is the beer collection. So basically, it's very simple. It's nothing, I mean, this could be a lot more involved or much bigger, but just to try to keep things simple. I just have the ABV of the beer, the name, and then the brewer ID, since I have a separate collection for that, and the beer type. So you can see there's 14 here at the moment, and every time I make this presentation, I always add new stuff. All right, so I have new ones to add to this database today. So there's a lot of good ones here. I even included Budweiser, but that's okay. And then in the brewer collection, I'm just storing the name of the brewer, like Southern Tier, and the city and state in which they operate. Okay, and there's 21 of them there. So we're gonna refer back to this as we run the application. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to do the mapping, for the two collections. So we have one corresponding for beer and obviously one corresponding for brewer. And basically it's a POJO with some additional builder stuff here. So you'll see we use the annotations here, column, entity, and ID. These look very familiar to those of you who've used JPA. So we wrap the class with an entity annotation, and then of course the primary key will wrap that with an ID annotation, and then same thing with the columns. So to keep it simple here, I just storing the name of there's also a beer type we add in there. And that's a separate enum right here, so we can refer to that, right? So you can see them all there, I think. Okay. And so that's embedded in there. And then, so here, this is using the column, but I'm referring to brewer ID. In this case, why don't I do it in the other ones? Well, because these match exactly, ID, name, and type. So ID, name, and, that's the brewer. Here. So the ID, name, and the type. Okay, brewer ID, you notice, is brewer _ ID. And if you would like to use the more traditional brewer uppercase ID without the underscore, you can do that. And all you have to do is in your annotation refer to the proper one that's in the database itself. So you obviously could use brewer _ ID here, but I wanted to show how you can map to two even if they're slightly different. I got just a basic default constructor, which we never use, right? But it's there anyway, for completeness. And then the primary constructor, passes all this stuff in here. And then getters and setters, and we don't need to focus on that because we all know what they look like. Got a toString. Now, of course, I could do all this in Java 16 and use a record, but we haven't gotten there yet. Then, thanks to Otamio, I'd like to be able to use the builder in the application itself. And this is all the the machinery in order to do that. So basically you have a static class and then all your corresponding types. And then, there's a beer builder, for the ID, the name, the type, and so on, right? And then a build method that returns the actual constructor that it builds in there. Okay, so we'll see how that's used. I think this is really cool, and this was this may have been obvious to, or maybe a lot of you knew this in the past, but it was something that I learned for the first time a number of months ago. And the same thing is here. We don't have to go through this in any gory detail, but again, this all corresponds to the brewer collection, and then the same the same getter and setter methods, or actually getter methods. I'm sorry. And the same builder stuff. So, all right, easy enough. And so we'll go through some of the other things here first before we look at the main application. There's a service that we use here, all right, and it uses inject. And you notice I'm still using the Java X. I may have been using an older version, which is probably why I had some difficulty. I haven't had the time to go back and experiment. I'd like to be able to obviously use the Jakarta namespace for these two. So that's homework for me, of course. So we're going to inject a database here, or a beer repository, I should say. We're using the database annotation. And we're going to give it a provider name, or DB. And this is actually more relevant if you're going to use more than one database in an application. But again, for completeness, I put this here. What I should show you is, before I forget, is a microprofile config file. And we're going to, you'll see an instance of DB1 here. And then the db1.database is beersdb, obviously, right? And then we're going to, the default port for MongoDB is 27017. And then the provider is, the or Eclipse JNoSQL. It has Diana, right? So that's part of the communication and the MongoDB configuration. There are corresponding, methods or classes, for the other database types itself. We have a manager producer. Again, I don't think this is more relevant for more than one database. So you can see here our property name DB1, right? Provider beerdb. And then here, this is a database type, obviously document. And you have the, the corresponding key value graph and column family of those. And you have your application where it produces a database, right? Get the brewer doc, and there's a get beer doc. This is all behind the scenes stuff. Okay. And again, I have the corresponding Jakarta namespace stuff I'd like to import, is to use instead of the, soon to be old Java X namespace. Okay, let's see. So now we have two different ways of doing things. And when I get to the main application, you can actually use a beer repository, an instance of that, or a beer service, and then same thing with the brewer. So technically, I don't have to have both in here, but again, as a demo, I want to show both. So in the beer repository, you'll see here. Okay, that was a little weird in the screen there. So we have the different find by or find methods and a delete method here. So I have the find all, find by name, find by brewer ID, and you can do find by whatever else corresponds to the data in your database. All right. So these get they get compiled behind the scenes. What I should say is instead of the interface, the classes themselves get created behind the scenes. And the same thing with the brewer repository. All right. In this case, I'm just going to go find all and find by name. And of course, you can just list whatever you need here in your interface. And similarly with the similarly with the service, it's different. Now you have to define your query. So you saw in the repository, right? All you have to do is declare them, and they get created when it generates the concrete classes. The implementation, that's what I was looking for earlier. And so in this case, so we have an insert method here, Oh, and we're going to have integrated in this is a document template type. And so we're going to do the insert method of template and then pass in the beer itself. And then we're going to do a find by name. We'll define that. And then there's the document query class. And then here's used this is the streams. So there's a select and then dot from dot where. So this all looks very familiar to everybody. Anybody who's used ANSI SQL over the years. So this is really easy, to use. And then there's a build method as the terminator of the string. And then you call the select method from template, and that's your query right there. And this is the find by brewer ID. Okay, you're going to select from beer where brewer ID equals the brewer ID being passed in, and then a build method. And the same thing with the brewer service. Yep. So I only have the one defined here. Okay. And you notice here a config property annotation. There's D1 that's referring to that. So if you're only using one database, you probably don't need this at all. So, okay, let's see. I think we're about ready to show the main class here. Yes. Okay. Are there any questions so far, or have I put anybody to sleep yet?
I don't see any questions in the Ask a Question tab.
Okay, great. Take a quick shot of water. But to be honest, these offices tend to be a little bit more warmer than the laboratory, and that's where my desk is. So it's been a challenge here. Okay. Oh yeah, this is I'm not using the logger in this case. That was from the the original application I started. One of the things you can do is in the Java SE without using Jakarta containers. You can use an SE container here and create that. So you create a new instance of that and then initialize. And then we're going to take that container and use that to select our service. All right. So that'll get the service that we defined earlier. And here are our ways of instantiating our beer repositories. So we use our get beer repository from the service, right? And then the brewer repository. And then in the service, you're using the container variable to select that. So that's how everything's wired up. First thing I'm going to do is get all the elements in the database itself. And the reason I do that is because I'd like to dynamically add to the end of the list. All right. So when I do that, I'm going to print out to the screen, there are, X number of beers in the database, X number of brewers in the database, and so on. All right. So we're going to use, we're going to create a brewer, and we're going to call it Newport Storm Brewing. This is up in Newport, Rhode Island, where I've visited in the past. I'm going to insert an ID of the number of brewers plus one. Okay. And then we're going to use the build method. This corresponds to the build method that I showed you in the POJO. And then we're going to, in the repository, we'll use the save method. Okay, again, this was all generated. The implementation was generated in the background. There's a save method to do that. And we'll save the variable storm in there. Using the service, I was just made aware last couple of months in New Jersey, in my own backyard here, in Stockton, New Jersey. I'm out in Clinton, and so this is Hunterdon County, western part of New Jersey, along the Delaware River. Oddbird Brewing. I have not been there yet, okay, but I've had a beer or two from their brewery at a friend's house. So I look forward to going there. So anyways, they're in Stockton, New Jersey, and the same thing, except we're going to use the insert method that was defined in in this case, the brewer service. And that was in here, right there. So, all right. So straightforward. There's another way to skin a cat here too, as they say, but using the template itself. So I have not gotten there yet. All right, so we're going to start using the find by methods here. So we're going to find brewer by name. So why don't we find the one we just created? All right. So by this, by the time the code gets here, that'll be created, right? And we'll print that out on the screen. And then from this we'll get the brewer ID, and obviously we'll do that using the brewer's variable, and then get the first element, which is 1 anyway, but just in case there's more than 1, that's why we have the list. And then we'll put that on the screen as well. Now we'll use that brewer ID. Since we store in the database, if you recall, that the beer itself had a brewer ID, and that's where we'll make that connection. All right. So now we could do the same thing. We're going to use the repository method to create a new beer, and since we're going to enter in 2 beers from Oddbird Brewing. The first one is an ESB, as they call it, extra Stockton bitter instead of extra special bitter. And this is beer type ale. So, recreating the beer itself. The brewer ID that we just got from calling the method. And the ABV is 4.3. And then we use a build, and then we'll the save method from the beer repository. And similarly with their extraordinary machine, which is an IPA. It's only 6.4, and we'll put that in as well. So now that we have those in there, and we'll run this, let's find a regular beer by name, something we haven't inserted just as we did here, as we will do here. So let's find Pumpkin, and this is one of my favorite beers by Southern Tier. It tastes as if you're biting into a piece of pumpkin pie. So that's the best way to describe that. I highly recommend it. Southern, it's out now, seasonal, of course. Anyways, then from that we could actually find a brewer ID, and obviously it's going to get the two newly created beers, because that's the brewer ID we still haven't assigned to anything else yet. Okay, so we'll see how all this works. And this is how you would actually do a delete. So we're not gonna do that, but that's how it works. All right. So for demo. So I think we're ready to run this thing. Is you guys ready over there? I really miss in-person, presentations. So I like interacting with everybody. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, we'll have to compile this since I updated this earlier. Okay. Just for is one am I using here? 2 dashes, right? I'm using 11. Okay, that's fine. It did compile, didn't it? I'm trying to remember. Well, let's run it. So. Memorize these things. That's why I do this kind of stuff. Okay, so we'll run the beer app and see if anything blows up. So, of course. All right, let's do. Yes, you notice that it compiled with JDK 11, but we couldn't run it with JDK 11. So this needs to have some updating done here. All right, so when it originally ran, I said there were 14 beers in the database and 21 brewers, and that was true before we get started. So now we're going to update this, or refresh this. There are 16 now, and you'll see the two. This is beer, the ESB and the Extraordinary Machine. Brewer ID is 23, so that was the second one. And when we go to the brewer collection, you'll see at the bottom. That's right, it's more than 20. So you'll see ID 23 is Stockton Oddbird Brewing. Right, and 22 is Newport Storm, and of course, when we got before that was a new one that we discovered in New Orleans this past summer, Meal Brewing. So, okay, so everything seemed to work nicely. So we found the brewer by name. So this is the output here. All right. So again, it's Jason, right? Oops. Okay, here's where we were. So we obtained the brewer ID is number 23, adding the two new ones. And then we find a beer by name, which I said was Pumpkin. The type is ale. The brewer ID is 1, which is Southern Tier, and it's an 8.6. Oh, and then we do find the varieties of beer by brewer ID. And of course, since we specify Oddbird Brewing, found these two here. So obviously, if you ran it with different ones here, one of these days I'm going to have time to actually make this a REST application. So it's that 4-letter word called time, right? Any questions on this? This is a good way to get started. You can obviously take this to make this as big as you'd like, an application like that.
There is one question in the questions tab. Is it possible to do bulk insert / update?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I have not tried update. If you can send me an email on that, I can actually try to play with that and try to do an update. I had not thought of that. I'm going to write that down. All right. Yeah, I'd have to research that a little bit. I've been so focused on just this, I never thought about doing that. So, but I'm sure there are methods to do that. Anything else?
No, that's it. And then we just have a few admin. Yes, the presentation will be uploaded after, so you guys can rewatch this. It'll be on the Jakarta YouTube channel, and I will post a link to that channel in the chat.
Yeah, and I have mentioned that at the end, but I have resources where you can get this now. So, I'll wrap up with a couple of small slides here. The current status, it's still in development. It's not part of the platform profile or the web profile just yet. And this is version 1.0.0-beta 3. And the intent is to migrate to JDK 11 after the release of Jakarta EE 9.1, which actually happened at the end of May. So I'd have to try to find out where that stands. So, but yeah, so as part of Jakarta EE 10, I don't think this will be underneath the under any one of those profiles. So hopefully, sometime next year, this can be under one of those profiles themselves. That would be cool, actually. I think this is really a useful specification. And well, there's some resources. I have these slides available. You can download now. I found some other thing. Here was I think it was one of the other InfoQ editors wrote something back in 2019 on Jakarta NoSQL. The specification itself, you can see in that first bullet, and there's a YouTube video. I think it features Otavio Santana and possibly somebody else. And then Baildong has an older Eclipse JNoSQL example. If you're familiar with, I think his first name is Eugene, if I'm not mistaken, but he's got some great blog posts on how to do various things in Java. And if you want to get involved, the best way is to contribute. You can fork the NoSQL repository as you see here, and you can get going and obviously do the traditional, branching and PRs and whatnot. So that's the best way to go with that. And I want to acknowledge Otavio, since he spent some time with me before I started doing these presentations, and answering a lot of my questions, and how do you do this, how do you do that, and that. So he was a real big help in helping me get going with this, and which obviously led to me starting to contribute to the specification. So this is my contact info. My Twitter handle is a lot of IT stuff, but I do have my political rants once in a while. I limit it to Twitter as opposed to other social media, but I've been a little bit better with that. And but then also you can put up with some cat stuff, since I have 4 cats at home. That's my Twitter feed. So my main website, and I have a portfolio page that has contains a number of other presentations that I do, and then have a GitHub repository under mpredley01. Okay, and speaking of beer, thank you very much. I appreciate taking the time out of your workday, or maybe if you're from Europe, obviously it's the end of your day, so you can actually enjoy one of these before I can. So with that, that's it.
Thank you for that excellent presentation today, Mike. And just a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you have any final questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat or using the Ask a Questions tab. I'll give you a few moments to do so while I wrap up. So the next Jakarta Tech Talk happens October 13th with Rudy DeBusker, as he joins us to present JDK17 and what's in it for the Jakarta EE developer. You can register for that session using the link I just put in the chat. And we're also looking to book more Jakarta Tech Talks through the remainder of 2021. So if you're interested in presenting a topic on that, you can use the link to present a talk. And finally, if you have any feedback for the Jakarta Tech Talk program, you can let us know through that as well. And let's see if we have any other questions. It doesn't look like that. Nope, just a lot of thank yous. So it looks like that is it. So I just want to say thank you again, Mike, for that presentation, and thank you for everyone who attended. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you.